My name is Dorothy Marsh. I was 64 years old the spring my son's company threw its annual investor gala, and I found out I had not been invited. Not by accident, not by oversight, by design. I only learned because my neighbor Roberta mentioned it while we were pulling weeds in my front garden on a Thursday afternoon. She said her husband Gerald had gotten an invitation through his firm. She said it casually, the way people say things when they assume you already know. "Oh, it sounds like such a beautiful venue," she said. "That rooftop downtown. Your son must be so proud." I smiled. I said yes, he must be. Then I went inside, sat at my kitchen table, and stared at my kitchen table, and stared at the wall for a very long time. My son is Colin. He's 37 years old and has been building a commercial real estate firm for the last 6 years. I know the story of that firm better than most people do, because I helped write the first chapter of it. When Colin was starting out, he had a vision, and not much else. He had a leased office the size of a large closet, a logo his college friend designed for $200, and a second mortgage on a property that made me lose sleep for 18 months. He came to me twice during those early years, once for money, a bridge loan he said was temporary, and once for something harder to name. He needed someone to believe in him when the numbers said not to. I believed in him. I always had. His father died when Colin was 15. Heart attack. No warning, no goodbye, just a Tuesday morning and then everything different forever. I went back to work full-time within the month. I was a bookkeeper. Not glamorous, not well paid, but steady and honest. I worked for the same small accounting firm for 22 years. I drove a reliable car, kept a clean house, saved what I could, and raised my son to understand that character was the thing money could not buy. He used to understand that. He really did. Somewhere in the last 2 years, something shifted. I noticed it in small ways at first. He stopped calling on Sundays. He started using words like optics and positioning when he talked about the business. He introduced me to people at his office holiday party last December by saying, "This is my mum, she's retired." Nothing more. Not, "This is the woman who taught me that a handshake means something." Not, "This is the person who signed her name on the dotted line when the bank needed more than my word." Just retired, like it was a category, like it was all I was. Then came the gala. I did not call him right away when I found out. I sat with it for 2 days. I turned it over in my mind like a stone I kept hoping had a cleaner side. Maybe there was a mix-up. Maybe the invitation was lost. Maybe Roberta had misunderstood something. On the 3rd day, I called his assistant, a young woman named Petra who had always been kind to me. I told her I had not received the gala invitation and asked whether she could check the guest list. There was a long pause. Then she said very carefully, "Mrs. Petrie. Marsh, I believe the invitations for the evening went through a separate vendor. Let me check and call you back." She never called back. That told me everything. I called Colin that evening. He answered on the 4th ring, which meant he had seen my name on the screen and thought about it first. "Mom," he said. Warm but careful. "I heard about the gala," I said. A pause. "It's a business event. Investors, partners. It's not really a family thing." "Your father-in-law is attending," I said. "Roberta's husband received an invitation through his firm. Half the neighborhood probably got one." Another pause, longer this time. "It's complicated. Explain it to me." He exhaled. "You know how you get at these things." I went still. How I get. Emotional. You talk about Dad, about the old days, the early years. People don't need to hear all of that. This is a professional event. I did not say anything for a moment. I needed that moment to make sure I did not say the wrong thing. "I understand," I finally said. "Good," he said too quickly. "I knew you would." I said goodnight and hung up the phone. Then I sat at the kitchen table again, the same chair, the same wall, and I let myself feel the full weight of what he had just said. Emotional. You talk about Dad. He was ashamed of me, not of anything I had done, of who I was, of the life we had lived, of the fact that I was a bookkeeper's widow from a modest neighborhood, and now he was building an empire and trying to convince wealthy men that he had always been the kind of person who belonged in a room like that. I thought about his wife, Genevieve. She was 35, polished, the kind of woman who wore tailored blazers to brunch. Her family had money, real money, the kind that had been sitting in accounts for generations. Her father, a man named Harding, had been a quiet but powerful presence on the edge of Colin's business from the beginning. I had always sensed that Genevieve measured everything, including me, against a standard I had not been told about. I thought about a phone call from 8 months earlier. Colin had asked me for a favor. He said his firm was refinancing a property, and they needed a guarantor to satisfy a technical requirement with the lender. He said it was temporary, minor paperwork, nothing that would affect me. He said he needed it done within 48 hours or the deal would fall through. He was stressed and rushed, and I was his mother. So I signed. I had not asked enough questions. Mothers do that. We trust the version of our children we raised, long after life has built a different one on top. I went to see my accountant that Friday. His name is Walter, old friend of my late husband, and he has looked at my finances for 15 years. I brought the paperwork I had kept copies of from that phone call 8 months ago. Walter put on his glasses and was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Dorothy, did you understand what you were signing?" He said it was temporary, a bridge guarantee. Walter looked at me over his glasses. "This is a personal guarantee on a commercial property loan. If the property defaults, they can come after your savings." I stared at him. "The property hasn't defaulted." "Not yet," he said, "but there's a balloon payment due in 4 months that Colin's firm may not be positioned to meet." The room got very quiet. I drove home slowly, both hands on the wheel, watching the familiar streets go by without really seeing them. Walter had given me copies of everything. I locked them in the filing cabinet in my bedroom, then I called my niece Audrey. Audrey was my younger sister Pauline's daughter. 38, sharp, worked in corporate communications for 10 years before starting her own small firm. She had known Colin since he was in diapers and had watched him change with clear eyes and no sentimentality. When I told her everything, she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Okay, how much time do we have before the gala?" 11 days. She was quiet for a moment. Then we figure out what we're walking into before we walk into it. I told her I had not been invited. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "That's about to change." I was not planning to make a scene. I want to be clear about that. I am 64 years old and I have never made a scene in my life. I have never thrown dishes or shouted in parking lots or aired family business in front of strangers. That is not who I am. But I had spent too many years being the woman who softened things, who made excuses, who swallowed hard truths to keep the peace. And now my name was attached to a debt I had not fully understood. My son was about to stand in a beautiful room and present a carefully crafted version of himself to people with money, and I was not supposed to be there because I was too real, too honest, too much of the actual story. Audrey came over that Sunday with coffee and her laptop. We spread everything across the dining room table, the guarantee paperwork, Walter's notes, Colin's business registration records, which were public, a press piece from a local business journal 6 months ago in which Colin was quoted saying his firm had been built on a foundation of strong family support and multi-generational values. Multi-generational values. Multi-generational values. "He used you in the press," Audrey said flatly. "He used the idea of me," I said. "Not me." She found more. A profile on a business networking site where Colin listed deep family roots in commercial property as part of the firm's background. His family had no roots in commercial property. His father had worked in municipal water management. I had been a bookkeeper. The closest we had come to commercial property was when my late husband looked at buying a small rental unit in 1998 and decided against it. None of that was what Colin had told the world. Colin had told the world a different story, a warmer story. A story with the hard parts quietly removed and the useful parts polished until they shone. The gala was on a Saturday in April. Rooftop venue downtown. 400 guests. Black tie optional. Colin's firm was honouring 3 business partners and announcing a new development project, the largest of his career. Audrey called in a favour. A woman she had worked with years ago, now an event coordinator, was handling the night's logistics through a third-party vendor. She quietly confirmed that the guest list had been finalised, that the evening would include a presentation and a formal signing of a partnership agreement with a real estate investment group based out of Atlanta. A signing. I sat with that for a moment. The same pattern. A big event, a performance, a deal closing immediately after the ceremony of it all. My son had not learned anything new. He had just found a larger stage. Audrey looked at me. "What do you want to do?" "I want to go," I said. She nodded slowly. "Then we do this right." The days between that conversation and the gala were not easy ones. I slept poorly. I replayed decades of memories the way you do when you're afraid you misread something for years. Colin at 7, making me breakfast on Mother's Day, a burned egg and toast with too much butter, carrying it into my room like he was delivering a crown. Colin at 16, coming home from his first job interview with a tie slightly crooked and a look of determination on his face that made my chest ache with love. Colin at 25, sitting across from me at this same table, telling me his father would have been proud. I still believed that. I believed his father would have loved who Colin could have been. That was the grief underneath the anger. Not that my son had become a stranger, but that he had chosen to. Audrey reached out to Harding, Genevieve's father. Not directly, through a mutual professional contact, a brief note indicating that someone with relevant background to the firm's history had information that might be useful to review before any agreements were finalized. Professional, measured, not threatening. Just a door left open. Harding's office responded. He would be available for a brief conversation the morning of the gala. The morning of the gala, I wore a charcoal blazer I had bought 2 years ago and never had occasion to use. I pinned a small gold brooch near the collar, one my husband had given me for our 20th anniversary. I did not try to look young or glamorous or like someone who belonged in a rooftop ballroom. I tried to look like exactly what I was. A woman who knew the truth. Audrey picked me up at 9. Harding's office was in a mid-rise building downtown. 12 floors, clean lobby, a receptionist who showed us in immediately. Harding was in his late 60s, white-haired, the kind of unhurried that comes from having enough money to never be rushed. He looked at me with the careful attention of someone accustomed to reading people quickly. "Mrs. Marsh," he said, "thank you for coming." I thanked him for his time. Then I put Walter's documents on the table. I did not perform. I did not cry or plead or make speeches. I explained as clearly as I could that my signature appeared on a guarantee attached to a property loan my son's firm was struggling to service. I explained that I had not fully understood what I was signing. I explained that in 8 months there was a balloon payment that Walter believed the firm could not meet, which would expose my personal savings to a claim. Then I put the networking profile printout on the table. The press quote. The phrase multi-generational values in commercial property. Harding read everything slowly, the way careful men do. When he finished, he looked up. "Has Colin told you about the Atlanta partnership?" "No," I said. "It closes tonight," he said. "If it closes," he picked up his phone and made a call. I could not hear the other end, but I heard his voice, steady and unhurried. He said he needed to see certain financial disclosures again before the evening. He said there were questions about the guarantor structure on an existing loan. He said tonight needed to wait. When he set the phone down, he looked at me with something I had not expected. Not pity, respect. "Your son is talented," he said. "He is also building on ground that hasn't been tested." "I know," I said. "Did he know you would do this?" I thought about it. He knew I was the kind of person who wouldn't. That was his miscalculation. Harding nodded once. "I'll be at the gala tonight," he said. "I think you should be too." Audrey was quiet in the elevator on the way down. Then she said, "That was the most composed thing I've ever watched anyone do." I looked straight ahead at the elevator doors. I've had a lot of practice being composed when I was actually falling apart. Colin called at 2 in the afternoon. His voice had the careful, surface-level warmth of someone who had just been told something alarming and was trying to find out how much you knew. "Hey, Mum, what are you up to today?" "Getting ready for this evening," I said. A pause. "What do you mean?" "The gala," I said. "I'll be there." The pause stretched. "Mum, I told you, it's a professional event." "I know," I said. "I'll be professional." "How did you even?" He stopped himself. "Harding." I said nothing. "Mum." His voice dropped, lost its warmth. "I need you to stay home tonight. I am asking you as your son. You stopped treating me as your mother a while ago," I said quietly. "I think that releases me from a few obligations. If you come tonight, I swear I will tell people you're not well. that you've been struggling since Dad died, that sometimes you get confused about things. I closed my eyes for just a second. There it was. The same move, the same ugly, practiced move. Dress the truth teller up as unstable so the lie can keep standing. Colin, I said, and my voice was very calm. You can try that. But Harding already has Walter's documents. He already asked your firm for revised financial disclosures. That happened 2 hours ago. So tonight, when you walk to that podium and you talk about family foundations and strong roots, I will be in the room, and the people who matter will know what the actual foundation looks like. Silence. Then, quieter. Why are you doing this to me? I'm not doing anything to you, I said. You did this. You put my name on a debt without explaining it. You built a reputation on a story that erased your father's real life. You told investors your family had roots in commercial property. We had roots in getting by, Colin. That's different, and it was honourable. You should have left it honourable. He hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for the last time that day and let the silence settle around me. Then I got up, put on my blazer and pinned the gold brooch at the collar. The gala was on the 20th floor of a building I had driven past for years without ever going inside. The rooftop opened at 6. By 6:30 it was full of the kind of people Colin had spent years trying to become, smooth and well-dressed and certain of their own value. Genevieve saw me from across the room before Colin did. Her face went pale in a way that good lighting almost hid. Almost. Colin saw me a moment later. He was standing with 2 men I did not recognize, mid-conversation, and the moment his eyes found mine, he stopped mid-sentence. I watched the recognition travel across his face, then the calculation, then something that looked almost like fear. I did not go to him. I went to the bar, ordered a glass of water, and waited. Harding found me first. He was with the Atlanta partner, a well-built man in his 50s named Clifton, who had the easy confidence of someone who had been in business long enough to trust his instincts. Harding introduced us. He said, "This is Dorothy Marsh. She is the guarantor on the Pembroke Lane loan. You should know her name." Clifton looked at me carefully. "The guarantor, I signed documents I didn't fully understand," I said. "My son asked me to, and I trusted him. I want you to know that before anything is signed tonight." Clifton's expression did not change much, but something shifted behind his eyes. He looked at Harding. Harding looked back. A conversation happened in that silence that I was not part of, but had made possible. Colin appeared at my elbow then. His voice was low and tight. "Can we talk privately?" "We can talk here," I said. "Mom." The word was a warning. "The Pembroke Lane loan has a balloon payment due in September," I said, not loudly but clearly. Clifton and Harding were still within earshot. A woman nearby turned her head. "My name is the guarantor. I was not told what I was signing. If the payment isn't met, my savings are exposed." "Colin, I need you to explain to everyone here how that happened." The silence around us spread outward like a ripple. Colin looked at Clifton. Clifton's face had gone careful and still. Harding stepped back half a pace, the way men do when they want to observe and not be caught in the blast. "She doesn't understand what she signed," Colin said. His voice was smooth, patient, the voice he used for difficult clients. "She's been struggling since my father passed. She sometimes misremembers details." From the edge of the group, Petra, his assistant, who had arrived 20 minutes earlier and had been hovering at the edge of my peripheral vision all evening, spoke up. "Mr. Marsh," she said quietly, "I pulled the guarantee document this afternoon. The loan is currently flagged for review. The balloon payment in September is listed in the firm's internal risk matrix as high exposure." Colin turned to look at her. She held her ground. "I thought you should know I told Mrs. Marsh the truth when she called," Petra said. "I should have done it sooner." The music kept playing somewhere behind us. A server passed with a tray of champagne. Somewhere on the other side of the rooftop, a small group laughed at something. The party went on the way parties do, indifferent to the thing falling apart in one quiet corner of it. Clifton spoke first. His voice was unhurried. "I need to understand the guarantor structure before I put a pen to anything." Colin looked at him. "We can explain everything tomorrow. Tonight is about Tonight is about due diligence, Clifton said, which I thought I had done. He looked at Harding. I'd like to continue this conversation Monday with legal present. Harding nodded. I'll have my office send the request. Clifton gave me a brief nod, collected his glass, and moved away with two of his colleagues. Just like that. Colin stood very still. He was looking at the spot where Clifton had been, and his face had gone through all its expressions and landed somewhere past pretense, in something raw and younger and sadder. Genevieve crossed the room and put her hand on his arm. She looked at me with something I had not expected, not anger, but a tired kind of recognition, like she had known this night was coming for longer than she wanted to admit. I told him to call you, she said quietly. When the Pembroke situation started looking difficult, I told him to tell you. I looked at her. Why didn't he? She shook her head. Because he was ashamed, she said. Not of you. Of how much he'd needed you and hadn't said so. That landed differently than I expected. I stood with it for a moment. Colin finally turned to look at me. The polish was gone. He looked the way he had at 15, the day after his father's funeral, sitting at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning because he couldn't sleep, wearing the same clothes he'd worn the day before. Mum, he said, just that. No argument, no strategy, just the word. I know, I said. I made a mess of everything. You did, I agreed. I didn't mean to use you. But you did. He nodded. He could not quite look at me. I waited. I was so afraid of looking like I'd started from nothing, he said. Harding's family, Genevieve's world, all of it was so much bigger than where we came from. I thought if people knew the whole truth, they wouldn't believe in me. I believed in you, I said, when it was just the truth and nothing else. That was enough once. He looked up then. His eyes were wet, which I had not seen in a very long time. Is it too late to fix it? I thought about Walter's documents, about the September balloon payment, about the years I had driven a reliable car and saved what I could. It's not too late to start being honest, I said. That's the only place anything real gets fixed. We stood there in the middle of that beautiful rooftop, while the party moved around us, and for a moment we were just a mother and her son at the kitchen table again, the bills spread out between us, figuring out what was actually true. Genevieve quietly asked a server to bring coffee. Audrey, who had been standing near the terrace door for the last 20 minutes and apparently had the discipline of a saint, came over and said nothing, just stood beside me and put a hand briefly on my shoulder. The Atlanta partnership did not close that night. Clifton's firm requested 3 weeks of additional due diligence, which turned into 6 weeks and a complete review of Colin's financial disclosures. Several things were restructured. Several things were disclosed that had not been before. The Pembroke Lane loan was refinanced. Colin's firm covered the guarantor liability and removed my name from the documents. Walter confirmed this in writing. I slept properly for the first time in months. Harding was harder to win back than Clifton. He was a deliberate man and not easily rebuilt on once he had reason to question the foundation. Colin spent 4 months on that work, not with charm or presentation, with transparency, documentation, and a willingness to let the whole imperfect story be visible. It was slower and it was harder and it was real. Genevieve called me 3 times in those months, twice for practical reasons, once just to talk, which surprised me and then didn't. Colin called every Sunday. He was awkward at first, stilted, like a man learning a language he had let go rusty. But he kept calling. That mattered. He never did explain himself to me in one clean speech. There was no grand reckoning moment, no single conversation that wrapped everything in a bow. It was smaller than that and more honest. A comment here about how much he missed his father. A question there about what I remembered of the early years. A silence on the phone one night that held more than most words do. One evening in late summer, he drove to my house for dinner without calling first. I fed him leftover soup and good bread, and we sat on the back porch until it got dark. He said, I read the profile again, the one I gave the business journal. I said, multi-generational family roots. I remember, I said. We didn't have that, he said. No. We had you working double shifts when the furnace broke. We had Dad picking up overtime every time school costs went up. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. That's actually a better story. I looked at him. He was looking at the garden, not at me, and his face was the kind of honest it only gets when people aren't performing for anyone. It's a true story, I said. That's what makes it better. He nodded. We sat there a while longer. The crickets started up. The neighbour's backlight came on and went off again. The same ordinary evening sounds I have been listening to from this porch for 30 years. I have thought many times about what I would say to someone who found themselves where I was that spring. Sitting at a kitchen table, finding out their child had quietly removed them from the story of their own life. Here is what I know. Loving someone is not the same as protecting their lies. Loyalty is not the same as silence. And the truest thing a parent can do for a child who has started to lose themselves is refuse to pretend not to see it. Colin did not need me to be absent. He needed me to be present enough to tell the truth. That is the only version of love that has ever done anyone any good. The gala season came around again this past spring. Colin's firm held a smaller dinner, 30 people, no performance, no signing ceremony, just a meal and a real conversation about where the business was going. He called me the week before. I'd like you to come, he said. As my mother. I'll introduce you properly. I asked what he meant by properly. He said, as the woman who kept us going after Dad died. As someone who knows what this firm actually started from. A pause. If you're willing. I told him I would think about it. I went. He introduced me to a room of 30 people and he said, This is my mother, Dorothy. She worked as a bookkeeper for 22 years. She went without a lot of things so I could go to school and start a business. She is the reason I understand what it means to earn something. The room was quiet for a moment. Then a few people nodded. One man near the back said quietly but clearly, That's a real foundation. I looked at my son across that room and I thought of the burned egg and the too much butter toast and the note he left on the kitchen table when he was 7 years old. And I thought of the man he had almost stopped being and the man he was slowly, honestly working to become again. And I smiled. Not the smile of someone who had won something. The smile of someone who had found something she was afraid she'd lost. That's the one I'm keeping. I have thought about that evening on the rooftop many times since it happened. Not obsessively, not with regret, but the way you turn a stone over in your hand after a long walk and wonder at what it took to make it. What I know now, clearly, is this. The way things ended was not an accident. It was the result of choices, every one of them, mine and Colin's and Genevieve's, stacked on top of each other over years until the weight of them demanded to be seen. Colin did not set out to become the kind of man who removes his mother from a guest list. That is the part that used to keep me up at night. He was not cruel by nature. He was afraid. And fear, when it goes unnamed long enough, starts making decisions that cruelty would make. It builds walls where there should be doors. It rewrites the past to make the present feel safer. It borrows from people who love you because it calculates wrongly that love is a debt without a due date. But there is a cause for every effect, and the effect of lying is always the same. Sooner or later, the truth is still there. You can rearrange it, dress it up, bury it under a better story, but it waits. It waited in Walter's filing cabinet. It waited in Petra's quiet conscience. It waited in Audrey's steady eyes across the dining room table. It waited in me, all those years of bookkeeping and careful living and raising a son who I believed, down to my bones, was worth more than the performance he was putting on. What I have come to understand is that honesty is not a personality trait some people are born with and others are not. It is a practice. It requires something from you every single day. It requires the willingness to be seen as exactly who you are, not the glossy version, not the multi-generational roots version, just the true one. And it is hard. I understand why Colin flinched away from it. I understand why the burnished version felt necessary when he was standing in rooms full of people who had always had more than he did. But here is what I wish I had said to him sooner, before the rooftop, before Petra spoke up, before Harding's expression went careful. The real story was always enough. A woman who went back to work the month after her husband died, a boy who watched his mother make the numbers work and decided, somewhere in his chest, that he would build something. That is a foundation. That is more than a foundation. It is the kind of story that does not crack under pressure because it is made of things that actually happened. The intelligence Colin needed was never about knowing how to position himself in a room. It was about knowing that the truth, told plainly, holds more weight than a well-crafted impression. The courage was never about taking risks with other people's trust. It was about standing in front of the people who had known him the longest and saying, "This is where I came from, and I am not ashamed of it." He is learning that now. Slowly. Honestly. That is the only way anything gets learned that sticks. And me? I am 64 years old, and I am still at the same kitchen table, still keeping careful records, still driving a reliable car. But I sleep well. I know exactly who I am, and I have stopped making myself smaller to help someone else feel bigger. That is the thing I want to leave with you. If you are sitting somewhere tonight feeling pushed to the margins of a life you helped build, you do not owe anyone your silence. You do not owe anyone a smaller version of your truth. The most powerful thing I did that whole season was simply refuse to disappear. And sometimes that is enough to change everything.